Bienvenidos, Ushamdi, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from the Spring 2023 semester taking the CTS-233 Section 400 Network Programmability course. This is the Cisco Networking Academy's DEVASC 200-901 Certification Exam Preparation course. And in this lab, Lab 4.9.2, we're actually going to be integrating a REST API in a Python application. And so we're going to be focusing on part 4 of this lab. Now, this is where the rubber hits the road, or meets the road, because we are now going to be creating our own Python script, which is going to be our API client that's going to be querying the MapQuest API server. And this lab is chock full of some fantastic code that we could then extend. Now, as we make our way through this lab, you need to keep in mind and start thinking about what type of features and functionality could I add to this lab for 494, which is going to be your team project. So keep that in mind as you work through this program. All right, so everything that I'm doing here, and I mean everything I'm doing, is doable outside of the DEVASC virtual machine. Now, I'm going to leverage the DEVASC virtual machine because that's what we're using for the course, but you could download VS Code on your host Mac or your host Windows box, and if you have Python installed, you can then just go to town. So let's go ahead and dive in and see what we've got. So I've got VS Code up here. Now remember, this is part 4. Parts 1, 2, and 3 of this lab are basically just kind of like, oh, hey, go get your MapQuest key from developer.mapquest.com and get things set up. And so here we are. We want to start where the coding starts. So what is the first line they want us to add here? Well, they want us to import the urllib, and you can see there it fills in, right? It gives us like 2 choices here, and you might be thinking, oh, well, urllib3 is probably better. Well, urllib3 and urllib.parse are both part of they're separate modules, right? They serve different purposes, but they're both part of the Python standard library. However, we want urllib.parse. Now, you can also see that urllib, we could do a request, we got a response. So there's other things you can do here, but we want parse. And the reason that we're going to be using urllib.parse is because it includes methods for parsing URLs, right? Like the http://. And remember, when we talk about the scheme and the authority and the query and the path and all that stuff, urllib.parse allows us to not only work with the different components, right, but allows us to construct full URLs. And I'm going to use URL. Typically, I'll say URI, but we'll just say URLs. You can construct URLs with urllib.parse. And you're going to see that here in this lab. And this is a very, very cool module. So we're going to import urllib.parse, and we're going to import requests, right? And you can see it actually gives us a whole bunch of options, but we just want import requests. So now that we've imported these objects, it wanted you to save the file off. I've already taken the liberty of doing that here. On a Mac, you can just do the Cloverleaf S, and that's even when you're in the virtual machine. So let's talk about these 2 libraries real quick. You can see you've got some information here, right, that talks about what it allows you to do if you were to hover over them. And remember, if you were to take a look at the documentation, so here is the python.org documentation for urllib.parse. Again, parse URLs into components. Well, you can not only break it down into components, and you can see, take a look, you've got the scheme, you've got the network location, which is like the authority, you've got the host name, the port that's being used. So urllib.parse can not only break down the components of a URL, but it can also encode, and that is to put back together. And I'm trying to make my way. In fact, let me just go ahead and search here for encode. So there's a urllib.parse.url encode. And so let's click on that. All right, and so this converts a mapping object or sequence of 2-element tuples, which may contain strings or byte objects, but this is basically allowing me to take some different components and then put it all together so that it it resembles an entire URL string, like the GET request string that we're going to be using here shortly. And that is exactly what we're going to do right now. So let's go ahead and start out here. We're on part 4. This is step 3. We're going to build the URL for the request to the MapQuest API server. And well, how do we do that? Well, we want to create, we're going to say main, and we'll call it main and then URL. Now, the lab is using different variables. These are variables I'm going to use because I prefer to do this. So we're going to say https://www.mapquest.com, or MapQuest API, sorry, MapQuestAPI.com. And then we're going to go directions, and then we're going to go version 2. And then we're going to say route, and we're going to put the question mark in there. Now, you should remember from previous lectures and videos that question mark is delimiting the scheme, the authority, the path, and then what follows the question mark. Yeah, the query, right? What are we querying on? And we saw that when we worked in Postman. And if I was to take a look over here at Postman really quickly, remember, here is the MapQuestAPI.com directions v2 route, and then we've got the question mark and everything. Oops, sorry, I didn't want to do that. And everything that follows the question mark, these are our parameters. So you've got the MapQuest API key. You've got the from parameter. We're starting from New York. Where are we going to? We're going to Seattle. And those are all simply part of this larger query string. So look what we're doing. We're basically taking this, creating a variable that represents that string, and we're going to call it main URL. In the lab, they call it main_API. Again, you can name it anything you want. The variable name, you can give it any name that you want. But the important point here is that we now have, right, and this doesn't change when we're using the route API from MapQuest, so why not hard code this in here? And we've got that value that we can refer to at any point. Okay, so that's the main URL. Now, they want us to do origin, right? Now, I'm going to spell that out. They use orig, but I'm going to say origin. So we're going to hard code in here Washington and DC. Okay, so that's our origin, and where is my destination? And so again, I'm going to type, did I spell that wrong? Destination. Yep, we're going to spell that out, and we're going to say our destination is where? So we're going to go to Baltimore, Maryland. All right. So we have the main URL. We've got the origin parameter. We've got the destination parameter. In other words, we have the to and the from, the same parameters that you saw right here, right? There's our to, there's our from. Now, again, those are the parameter names that are getting passed in. I'm simply using variable names in my script that we are then going to refer to when we use the URL encode method from urllib.parse to provide key value pairs that will then create that entire GET request string, right? So let's get our MapQuest API key in here. And so I'm just going to say API key. And you don't want to call it MapQuest API key because we know we're using MapQuest here. And so here's my key. Again, you should generate your own key, and that is something that should have been done at this point. And so I'm going to go ahead and say, whoops, we're going to say copy, and then we'll drop it in here with, I don't think the Cloverleaf V does not function too well in VS Code. All right, so there is my API key. All right, so all 4 of those things right there, those make up the entire GET request. Here it is right here. This is what we want it to look like, just as it looked. I don't know if this is still going to work anymore. Yeah, so it still works. Just as it looked right here, right? Because that is the HTTP GET request. We've got our, in the parameters after the question mark, all of our parameters. What's our key equal? Well, the key is that string. What is our to field equal? Seattle. What is our from parameter equal? New York. So we're trying to construct this in a Python script. And so to do that, to take those 4 individual components right there, and we're just going to simply call it, and they call it URL. All right, we'll go with that. So we'll say URL is going to be the main URL. And what do we want to do? We want to concatenate the main URL with, and here's where we get into the urllib.parse dot. And as soon as I do the dot, you see we got all kinds of different things we can do here. And take a look at that. You can do URL defrag, URL join, URL parse, split. And so those are the things. Split would be like to deconstruct a URL, but we don't want to deconstruct the URL. We want to encode the URL. And so if I mouse over this, and this is one of the values here of VS Code, is like I mouse over it and oh, I get like a little helper type thing here. And you could probably look at this and see, okay, well, what are we doing here? It encodes a dictionary or sequence of 2-element tuples into a URL query string. Okay, well, how would we do that? So let's go ahead and open the method up. And remember, we could use the values, right? And that's what we're going to pass a dictionary to it. And the key value pair for the first dictionary item is going to be that key that we used earlier, which is my API. And you can see it kind of helps you out here, API key. And how do we separate the elements of a dictionary? With a comma. Okay, so that's my key. Now I'm going to do my from, right? And remember, the keys that you see in the quotes, those are the parameter names, not the variable names, right? So here, key is what we would put in the URL. Remember, from is what we would put in the URL. The value that we want from to represent is origin, comma, and then we have our to key. The parameter name and the value is going to be destination. And then we've got the closing curly brace and then the closing parenthesis. And what this will do is it is going to concatenate or pull together the main URL, which is this string right here, all the way to the question mark, and then right after the question mark, we are encoding or we are constructing the query portion of the GET request. And what is it composed of? Our API key, our from origin, and our to destination. And these are API key, origin, and destination. These are just these variable names we created here that represent these values that URL encode, the method, is going to use to construct them to look just like this. So it says, and there's key, right? And remember, if I click in here, there's key, there's from, there's to. And so that is all URL encode is going to do. It's going to pull those together. We're going to then Python will concatenate the main URL with that string, and that is going to give us the query string. Now, how could you check that? Well, let's go ahead and say print URL here, right? I want to print and see what I'm going to get. In fact, the lab actually mentions this, and I'm really glad that they did, is don't type up all the lines of code from this project and then hit run, right? Let's take an incremental approach so that we can catch any mistakes that we may have made early on. So how might I approach this? Well, I would say, I just do the cloverleaf S for the save, and then I'll say run, run without debugging. And what do we see? Oh, well, look at that, right? It tells us, it's run in Python, and then here it prints out my query string, my GET request query string. Well, what if I was to copy this? And I don't know, let's say we come over here to the Postman application, and I'm going to do, and the screen got all messed up here. And I'm going to do a new post request or new GET request, right? So let's paste in that URL and see that's what URL encode did for us. It did all of this work right here. And then we just concatenated or joined it with the main URL, and look at that. We get a query response of 200 OK. It took 743 milliseconds. Excuse me, I can even save the response, but more importantly, let me take a look. What do they say that the code should look like? Well, take a look at what Postman says we could do with the code here. And you could certainly do this, right? So this is another way you could approach it. But, I mean, take a look at that. I mean, that's kind of a mess. And that's not going to really scale well if I wanted to make this a little bit more dynamic, right? So what are we going to do next? Well, now that we've got the query string, we've confirmed it works. In fact, I grabbed it, put it into Postman, and showed you that it's working. Now we should be able to go ahead and make, or I'm sorry, now we should go ahead and make the request, I'm sorry, thing pops up all the time. The URL, the API GET request. Okay, so JSON data is a variable name that is going to capture, and now we use the requests, which is the HTTP for humans, and this is a third-party module, right? This is not part of the standard library, but we go ahead and we import it anyway, and we say requests.get. Well, all we're doing here is we're sending a GET request to the MapQuest API server. Now, what am I sending to the MapQuest API server? I'm sending that query string, that URL. I want to query to see, or I want to query to get a response back and have MapQuest tell me, okay, well, what is all of this information, right? What are the directions I'm asking for here? And we want that information, right? We say .json there. Now, the .json with the open parents, closed parents, that is a method that is part of the requests library. And what we're saying here is, give me that data back, and I'm gonna tweak it, right? I'm gonna encode it as if it was a Python dictionary, right? So I'm gonna treat it as if it's a Python dictionary when we save it into this JSON data variable. Because remember, the JSON data is almost identical to the Python data types of a Python list is a JSON array. A Python dictionary is a JSON object, right? They use the same format in syntax as the Python data types, JSON does. And so this is going to make it really easy for us to work with this. So here we go. So this is the GET request. So we are literally, this line right here is executing. When I click send, that is what that line is going to execute, but it's going to do a little bit more than that. You can see we get it back. This is the JSON format here, but we are going to treat this as a Python dictionary that's going to be captured here in this JSON data variable name. And that's all this is doing. All right, so now that we've got this, again, a little checkpoint here. Why don't we print and see what does the JSON data look like? And if I hover over here, you can see returns the JSON encoded content of a response. So it's returning the JSON encoded content, but we're treating it, we're going to use it as a dictionary. And let's go ahead and say print JSON. So we'll do cloverleaf S, we'll come up here, we'll say run with no debugging, and there it is. So now at this point, I know that my program is still working, it's running, I'm not having any issues with it at all, and I'm getting the JSON data. So the final code looks like, oops, let me get rid of this here. So the final code looks like this, or it could look differently if you're using different variable names. You're going to have a different URL key, API key. Again, if you wanted to use my API key, feel free. And we ran our test and everything did exactly what it was supposed to do. So now we're going to change the variables. And you can see one of the limitations of this program right out of the gate is, well, I mean, what a pain this is. I'm going to have to come in here and let me change this. And they want us to use some directions in Frascati, Italy, and I have no clue where that is, and Rome. And I do know where Rome is, so let's see what we've got here. Rome, Italy. All right, so we'll do cloverleaf S to save it, and let's run it and see if MapQuest can give us the information that we're looking for, and it can. Right now, I have no clue what some of these places are, but those are the directions. So it's working, and really what that step is showing you is, okay, well, maybe I want to start in Crofton, Maryland, and I want to go to Santa Rosa, California, right? We'll do a cloverleaf S, save it and then run it, and let's see. Okay, yeah, that worked. That was fantastic, right? So it works. So we know that it works, and we now know we can change the origin and the destination, right? So just by changing these two variables here, all of the other code is reusable. In other words, all of this other code that's in here stays exactly the way that it is for now. Okay, now we're going to take a look at step 5. We're going to print the URL, which, well, actually, we've already done that, but it wants us to save the script off with a different name here. So let's do that. We're going to say save as, and remember the save as dialog box may open behind the VS Code, and they just want us to change the name and do _2. All right, so now we're working with MapQuest _parse-json_2, because now we're going to do some other things. And their print statement for the URL, they wanted us to say, what is it? Just, URL like this. And then we're going to do a space, and we're just going to concatenate the actual URL. And we're just putting here, again, this is just a string, and I could put something a little more descriptive in here. Your MapQuest API get request URL is, right? And so then it's going to print out the URL that we're using. And then we've got the JSON data. Now, here's where it's going to get interesting, right? They want us to get the status code from all of that JSON data. And so we'll step down here. In fact, let's go ahead and run this and make sure, again, incremental changes, make little changes, run it, and make sure that it still does what you want it to do. And so again, you'd have to scroll back up a ways here through all of this JSON data to see that it actually printed out the URL. And it did at the very, very beginning, so we're just going to go ahead and click on that. All right, so we print out the JSON data. And here's what they want us to grab. Now, they want us to get the JSON status. So we'll say JSON status. Now, how are we parsing this data? In Python, with the output that you're seeing here in VS Code, it's next to impossible to kind of fish through there and find the status code, or to actually, kind of understand what it is you're looking for and find it. So here's what we can do. We're going to comment out the printing of the JSON data, and the JSON status, we want to get our query string, right? We want to get that the get request URL. And so what I'm going to do here is we're going to say JSON data, right? Because that's what I used as my variable name. And we're going to parse into that data. We're going to say info, right, is the key. Oops, sorry. Info is the key. And the status code is the next value that we're trying to find. So if I have that information, right, if I know the way that I parse a Python dictionary is to look for a key that has a value, and maybe that value is another dictionary that has a key, and that this is ultimately going to get me down to the value that I'm looking for. So let's go ahead, we'll save this, let's run this, because we want that query string, right? So we'll say run without debugging, and we see right there. So your MapQuest API get request URL is, and so let's go ahead and let's say copy. Now, the format here in VS Code is not helpful, but where is it helpful? Well, what if I came over here and we're just going to copy that whole thing and replace it with our Crofton to Santa Rosa string. So here is that get request URL, and we're going to say send. And so now that the data's down here, we get a nice graphical representation of all of the data. Now, unfortunately for us, we want to come way down here to the kind of by the very bottom. And you can see that under the main dictionary, the main JSON object, we have a key and it has a value right here. So the key is info, the value is a dictionary. So then I parse into the dictionary again and get status code. So this is where the open bracket info, close bracket, open bracket status code, close bracket, is going to give me the status code, and 0 means success. So back to our script, if I was to close this and then say print JSON status, right? What was my request status? And we save it and we run it, we should get that our status is 0. Now, again, the 0 by itself, it doesn't make much sense. So here's what we could do. And let's use the format method here, the string format method, just to show you a different way we can print things up. We can say the response code from your API GET request was, and we'll put open brace, close brace, that ends our string, put the dot format, and, oops, sorry, and we can do that right there. All right, let's save this. Let's run this. And there you go. The response code from your API GET request was 0, right? And then there is the URL that we're using to make that RESTful GET request. So pretty cool. Well, now we're going to take it a step further here. And this is something that you may want to think about when we run that GET request, right? Right up here, the JSON data, we run the GET request. What's the HTTP status code that we want to have here? We want to have a status code of 200, and I'm gonna leave the printing of the JSON data commented out here because it makes it a mess for right now. But we want a code of 200. So how might this code help me above? So this is going to check to see, is my JSON status equal to 0, right? If it's equal to 0, then I'm going to print, what do they want it to say? We'll say your API status, they have it. Okay, your API status is, and what are we doing here? They're going to, okay, so they're going to do this, right? They're going to use concatenation. Now remember, when we saw the 0, did it have quotes around it? It didn't. So this is one of those sort of little catchy things here where we're going to put the JSON status code there, but we're going to typecast it as a string data type, because remember, it's an integer. So we're going to treat it as if it's a string, and then we're going to put the following, and I'll just change, this equals a successful API call. And we're going to do that, and then we're going to do \n because they want a new line in there. All right. So that is one way to do this output here. Again, remember, we're typecasting here. What would be another way we could do this using the format method? Again, because it gives us a little bit more flexibility. And so what we could say is your API, and I can't see the line above, your API status is, and I can do that for the first variable I want to use. So that would be our 0. The little open brace, close brace just replaced string, open parent, JSON underscore status, close parent. We don't have any of the plus signs or anything like that. And then we could say, and then what, I need to see what I got under here. I can't. Okay, this is a successful. All right, so that's what I wanted to say. So we're going to come up here again. I'm going to say, this is a successful API call. 3, and we get to the end of the string. We do the dot format, and then what do we put in here? JSON status, if we spell it correctly. And I think I've got all the parentheses I need. Everything looks good. So that would be another way you could do it using the format method from the string class, as opposed to typecasting it and doing concatenation. All right, and you know what? I just realized I forgot my let's see what happens here on this \n. All right, so let's save this and let's run this code and see what happens. Excuse me. All right, we'll take a look at that. Your API status code is 0, and we got the new line character here. We got the carriage return for both. And so your API status is 0. This was a successful API call. So there's 2 different ways that we could do that, right? And I just showed you how you could use it, concatenation with strings, but we got a typecast because JSON status is an integer, or you can use the format method with strings. All right, pretty cool. So now that we know that we've got this portion of our code working, think about this. If JSON status equals 0, right? So we're checking to see if the status is 0. And if it is, right, if we have success, it's going to tell us it's a success. Where have we seen code like that before? Well, remember our random books. Take a look down here at the code in this file. This is checking the status code. How might you use this code to check on the GET request that you make here? And again, maybe you're checking, you're not going to be using the JSON method down here, and saying if this JSON data is equal to 0, but how might you enhance the code in your project with your team to check to see if the GET request returns 200? And if it does, then you return the JSON data variable, right? Or if it doesn't, it raises a request. Again, a great way to reuse and borrow code right here. Now, you don't have to have it inside of a function. You can work that into your program right here, or you could enhance it and put in a function. So just, again, some things to think about. Now, on step 6, they have us test the printing of things, and we do that, and that, excuse me, that worked great. So now we're going to add user input. And again, so this is probably the end of parse-json_2. So they want us to say file. We're going to come over here. We're going to say save as. And again, that save as dialog box is still opening behind VS Code. And we're going to say JSON_3, because now we're going to add in a while loop to our script, and we're going to maybe change things up a little bit here. So what it's asking us to do is, after we define the API key, right, it wants us to put a while loop in here so that the program is going to simply run and run and run, but we're going to be getting user input in order to make that happen. Because again, hard coding the destination and the origin in, it worked fine for the original version of our program, but we want to make this interactive now. So what is that going to look like? So here's what we're going to say. We're going to say while true, and remember that T has to be capitalized. So as soon as I say that, you can see it's indenting here, and this is going to be the catch, is the rest of this code will also need to be indented, right? Because remember, indentation is what is grouping the blocks of code together. So we're going to say origin, and that's going to be input, right? So we're prompting the user, and we'll change it up a little bit here. We'll say, please enter your starting location. All right, so that's going to enter the starting, or that's going to prompt the user to give us their starting location. And then, of course, destination. We're using the same variable names, but we're getting the values in a different fashion. And sorry about that. And that happens sometimes when the VM slows down a little bit. And then we'll go ahead and say, and it left off the input, we'll say input, please enter your destination. And there we go. And so now when this script runs, and we have it inside this while loop that's going to run forever, right? Unless we do a Control-C and bail out of there. But the key is that this is going to prompt the user. This is going to make it really user-friendly, right? So let's go ahead and let's indent all of this code. Now, I might be able to highlight all of this and drag it all in at the same time. But 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to take this approach, 2, 3, 4, and then we got to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And maybe you can tell me, how would I do that? How would I highlight all of this code and then get it to indent 4 spaces for me instead of doing what I just did? But again, we've got everything here underneath the while loop now. And now the user is going to get prompted again and again and again. So let's save our code, Cloverleaf S on the Mac, run, and let's run this code without debugging. And let's see what happens. Okay, so enter your starting location. So I'm going to say Crofton, and Maryland, and destination Santa Rosa, California, right? So there's my URL. There is my GET request. That's everything we were looking for. Again, the JSON data is not there. Now, if you wanted the JSON data, again, I'm going to leave it out because it just makes it so much more difficult to see what's happening here. So again, please enter your starting location. Well, maybe I want to go from Crofton, Maryland to another favorite spot of mine, which is Coronado, California. All right, so there is URL encode doing its thing. So there's my RESTful get URL string. I'm going to be get request URL string I'm going to use. The response code was a 0, and you can see we've got our print statements here. And again, this is just going to run and run and run until I do Control C. That's one way to get out of it. And that ends the program, right? Now, obviously, that's not ideal. So what they're going to have us do now is we're going to add some additional functionality in. But again, we're doing these incremental checks, these incremental saves. So let's save as, and here we're going to simply save this as version 4 of the file, right? So again, each version that we've saved has additional functionality. We saved, JSON_1, _2, _3, _4. So as we continue to work here, we're adding additional features and functionality in. So now what it wants us to do is it wants us to check here after the origin gets entered in. I messed that up. So after the origin gets entered in, if the origin is is the string quit, or is the origin equal to the letter lowercase q. So if the user for the origin types in quit or q, and let's spell origin right up here. There we go. And again, it's kind of lagging a little bit here. So if the let's make sure we get this right. This is kind of slowing down here a little bit. So if the user enters in, because remember, input's going to return a string by default. So if the user enters quit or q, what do we want to do to get out of the while loop? Remember, this is kind of Python 101 from our early on review. How do I break out of a while loop? Yeah, pun intended, we use the word break. So if the user enters in quit or q, that's it, we're done. We're out of the while loop, and guess what? The while loop is the whole program right now. So we're out of there. And the same thing on the destination. Maybe, and I guess they're doing this so that if the user decides after typing in the origin that they, if the destination is quit, or the destination is, and did I spell that right? Of course I did not. Destination, there we go. If the destination is the letter Q, then what are we going to do? Yeah, we're going to break. We're breaking out of the loop. And so that's how you can quit the program. Now, here's one thing, right? How does the user know that if they type quit or Q that they can get out of here? Yeah, they don't, right? So please enter your starting location, or we can say, and I've got that in double quotes, quit, Q-U-I-T, or Q to quit, right? And then we can add the same thing down here on the destination. So please enter your destination, or quit, or Q. Yeah, VS Code, when it lags on the virtual machine, it enters in all kinds of great stuff there, or Q to quit. All right, so there we go. So now the user kind of knows what's going on. So let's save it. Let's run it, and let's see what happens here. Run without debugging. So you see, that's pretty cool, right? Please enter your starting location, or quit, or Q to quit. Well, let's try that right out of the gate. I'm going to do a lowercase q. All right, we're done. Let's run that program. Let's run that program again. Let's do it again up here. So we'll say run, and run without debugging. And here we go. Let's type in the word quit. Let's test that. Does that work? Okay, it does. So again, we just tested it. It quits both ways on the origin. I'm not going to test destination because, again, the code's the same, so we would expect the same result. But let's confirm that if I put in here Crofton, Maryland, and then I put in here Coronado, California, what do we get back? Is my program still working? Absolutely. My API status call is great. Again, we're not printing the JSON data out right now so that it doesn't completely mess up this area here and we're like going up and down. Okay. So display the JSON data in JSON view. Okay, now this is a phenomenal plugin for the Chrome web browser. Firefox has something similar, right? So let's check it out here. So all I need is the GET request URL, right? What am I sending to the API server, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do a right click here. We're going to say copy. And I can go to MapQuest developer. I'm sorry. I can go to the Chromium web browser, and I believe JSON view extension, we can put this into the Chromium web browser. So I look at my extensions. I'm going to say add to Chrome. And what is this going to do? This is a phenomenal little plugin, right? That when you put in a GET request, and that GET request is going to return JSON data, let's take a look at what it does. Look at that, man. Sorts it out, makes it nice and readable. Again, if I was to do Control+ sign here to make it a little bit bigger, excuse me, take a look at this, right? So here, just in the Chromium web browser, and it works in Google Chrome. And again, Firefox has something similar, but I'm not a fan of the way Firefox presents the data. So Google Chrome, get the JSON view plugin, and now I can see, oh, all right, well, take a look. So here's the, the route key right here, and you can collapse it. And then there's that info key we used earlier to get the status code, right? So what if I wanted to add to my program the text, the copyright text? What would that look like? So it's under info, which is under status code, and then status code and then under the copyright is under info as well, right? And then we can try to get the text. So how would I do that? So I would need info as the first key, and the value is this dictionary. And in this dictionary, the first key value pair is status code 0. The next key value pair, again, separated by the comma, is copyright, and its value is another dictionary with the key text. So how could we get it to print out, the copyright text? Well, let's go back to, and it's going to move us there like that. Let's go back to our program here. Let's drop this down, and we'll go back to where we were printing, where we were capturing the JSON status. So while we're here, why don't I also capture the MapQuest, and I'll just say copyright is going to be, let's just get, I'm trying to think of an easy thing to put in here. Let's just get copyright and then status. I think that's what we called it. Copyright, is that the name of it? Or copyright text, I'm sorry. We wanted copyright text. All right, so copyright text. So the copyright text, so that is going to be assigned from the JSON data. The first key we're going to use is we need info, right? Because info is ultimately, if we go back here and look, info is ultimately that top level key. The value is a dictionary. We don't want the status code. We want the key value pair copyright and then the text. And so let's go ahead and say, excuse me, info and then copyright, and then the next key is, I keep forgetting the text. Oh, love when the virtual machine starts to lag a little bit there. All right, and then we want the text. Okay, so this is going to parse or dig down into that JSON data, going to the info key, and then looking at its key value pairs from the dictionary that it has. It's going to look for copyright, and then it's going to look for text. And so if we follow that down the path, info, copyright, which is another dictionary, and then text, which gives us this value right here. So let's see if that works and what that prints up. So how do we save it? We're going to do Cloverleaf S, and let's go run. run without debugging. Oh, and of course, I didn't realize launch. Let's do another instance, I guess. I didn't realize that was already running there. But again, the problem here is, and I'm going to go Q to quit, is what did I forget to do? Adding new code in, and I forgot to drop a print statement in here real quickly underneath this. And we'll just simply say print the MapQuest copyright text is, and let's use the format method here from the string class and put in here copyright text. There we go. And that should do what we need it to do. All right, so now let's save it again. Let's come up here and say run without debugging. And yep, we're going to fire up another instance. And so what do I want to do? We're going to go from Crofton, Maryland to Coronado, California. And so there's our URL for the GET request. And then here's what we added. The MapQuest copyright, I said test, should be text, is, and there it is, right? So that's how easy it is to parse JSON data. And let me fix this here. That's how easy it is to parse JSON data. Would this be another feature you could add to your project? It absolutely could be a feature you add to your project. So you can start to think about, well, maybe I want to put in the alt text, right? Maybe I want to drop that in, or I want to go look for other things. But this is how you could deal with the info, copyright, and then text. Maybe you want to do the image URL. So, but again, when we start to dig down into the route, you're going to run into some Python lists as values in a key value pair. And in that list, you've got a dictionary. And that dictionary could be your turn-by-turn maneuvers, right? So again, that's data we're going to be parsing here shortly. But as you can see, the program did everything that we wanted it to do. We now know that we can use JSON code to take the URL string, dump it into the Chromium web browser, and then we're able to kind of break things down and see like, oh, okay, where is all this stuff sitting? All right, well, this is a great stopping point right here for part 4 of lab 4.9.2. And again, my computer's kind of slowing up here and I need to bring up the PowerPoint. Where are we at? There we go. All right. Well, that's going to do it for part 4 of 4.9.2. And this should definitely have you off to a good start. All right. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.